A chuck roast costs a fraction of what a dry-aged ribeye costs at a specialty butcher, and most people have written it off as a braise cut before they ever gave it a fair trial. I have spent 40 years breaking down beef, and I will tell you what the restaurants serving dry-aged beef on their menus do not advertise. The early stage of dry aging, the part that builds the crust, concentrates the surface, and seasons the meat all the way through, does not require a humidity-controlled aging room. It requires salt, a wire rack, and 48 hours in an ordinary refrigerator. This is not a claim that 48 hours produces the same result as 60 days. It does not. What it produces is the part of that result that matters most to the home cook, and the cooking method that follows does the rest. Here is how it works. Chuck comes from the shoulder and neck, one of the most heavily worked muscle groups on the animal. Every step the steer takes engages this area, which is why the muscle fibers are dense and why the connective tissue running through them is substantial. That connective tissue is collagen, and collagen is the defining fact of this cut. It is the reason chuck roast is inexpensive, and it is the reason most people treat it as a one-dimensional braise cut and nothing else. The mechanism is straightforward. Collagen is tough. Cook it hot and fast, and it stays tough, because the heat never stays long enough to change it. Cook it at sustained low temperature over several hours, and it converts to gelatin. And gelatin is one of the most desirable things in a piece of cooked beef. It is what makes the texture yielding, what gives the mouth a coating richness that lean cuts simply cannot provide, and what makes an inexpensive cut taste like something that cost more than it did. Alongside all of that collagen sits generous intramuscular marbling, fat threaded through the muscle itself. On a ribeye, that marbling is exactly why people pay the premium. On a chuck roast, it is sitting there at a fraction of the price, doing the same work in a different vehicle. The $5 framing in the title is real in the same way earlier price figures in this channel have been real. A regional and sale-dependent number, not a guaranteed price at every counter. What is consistent is the gap between what chuck costs and what the cuts above it cost. That gap is technique waiting to be applied. True dry aging is not a technique. It is an environment. Temperature held between roughly 34 and 38 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity maintained between 70 and 90% relative, and continuous airflow moving across every exposed surface of the meat at all times. Remove any one of those three conditions, and you are no longer dry aging. You are either freezing, desiccating, or spoiling, depending on which variable you lost. Duration matters as much as environment. The minimum window for any noticeable effect is around 14 days. Standard commercial dry aging runs 21 to 60 days. Some producers push past 120. During that time, two entirely separate mechanisms are doing different jobs inside the muscle. The first is enzymatic tenderization. Calpins and cathepsins are naturally occurring enzymes in the muscle tissue, and given sufficient time, they begin breaking down the structural proteins inside the fiber, the internal scaffolding that makes raw meat firm. Most of that structural softening happens in the first 1 to 2 weeks. Then it tapers, though it never fully stops. The second mechanism is moisture loss and what that evaporation produces. Water leaves the surface of the meat and works its way inward over weeks. A cut aged 30 days can lose 15 to 20% of its original weight in water. What remains is more concentrated. The flavor compounds that were diluted by that moisture are now closer together in the same way that reducing a stock concentrates and intensifies it. In the later stages of aging, a third process begins. Lipases release free fatty acids from the fat, which then oxidize and produce the aroma compounds responsible for the characteristic nutty, earthy, buttery note of a long-aged steak. That flavor is real, it is specific, and it takes weeks to develop. It cannot be rushed. A dark, hardened outer layer called the pellicle forms across the surface during this process and is trimmed away before cooking, contributing to overall yield loss. None of this happens in 48 hours. What does happen in 48 hours is genuinely worth knowing. Here is what 48 hours in an ordinary refrigerator can actually do, stated without embellishment. You apply salt heavily and evenly across every surface of the roast, top, bottom, sides, and any exposed fat cap. You place it uncovered on a wire rack set over a rimmed tray, so air contacts all surfaces and any released moisture falls away from the meat rather than pooling against it. Then it goes into the refrigerator, uncovered, at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and you leave it there for 48 hours. Two things happen during that window. The first is osmotic seasoning. Salt draws moisture to the surface of the meat. That moisture dissolves the salt and is then reabsorbed back into the muscle, carrying the seasoning inward throughout the entire tissue. This is not surface salting. The interior of the roast is seasoned, not just the outside. The second thing that happens is surface drying. The exposed surface of the meat begins to desiccate, and in doing so, it starts the earliest stage of pellicle formation. A full pellicle takes days to weeks under proper aging conditions. 48 hours only begins it. What that partial drying gives you is a surface that the Maillard reaction can reach immediately when it hits a hot pan, because there is almost no surface moisture left to boil off first. The crust you get from that surface is deep, even, and consistent in a way that a freshly salted steak simply cannot match. That crust is the primary payoff of this entire method. It is real, it is significant, and it is the reason 48 hours is worth planning around. Push much further than that with a plain, uncovered brine, and the surface texture changes in ways most people find unpleasant. 48 hours is the upper limit of the benefit window, not an arbitrary stopping point. The 48-hour brine does not tenderize chuck. That needs to be said plainly, because the title of this video makes a claim, and that claim has to be fully defensible. Dry aging's enzymatic tenderization operates over weeks, not hours, and 2 days in a home refrigerator does not produce meaningful protein breakdown inside the muscle fiber. What tenderizes chuck is collagen conversion, and collagen conversion requires sustained heat over time. There are 2 ways to deliver it. The first is a low oven. Set it to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. The low temperature is the mechanism. Above roughly 300 degrees, the exterior of the roast climbs well ahead of the interior, and what you need is time at temperature throughout the whole piece, not surface heat racing toward the center. Cover the roasting vessel tightly so moisture stays in the environment and the surface does not dry out before the collagen has had time to convert. Target internal temperature depends on what texture you are after. Between 195 and 210 degrees produces a fully yielding result that pulls apart. Pulled earlier, around 175 to 185, the roast holds its shape and slices cleanly. The second route is sous vide, and it is the more precise answer to what this script is actually attempting. A water bath held at 133 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 to 40 hours keeps the interior at medium rare temperature long enough for the collagen to convert fully, without pushing the meat past that doneness. The result holds a pink interior, does not look braised, and does not taste braised. That is the technique that makes the word steak in the title honest rather than aspirational. The sequence is brine, long cook, hard sear, in that order for specific reasons. Before the technique goes any further, the food safety question needs a direct answer because leaving it unaddressed here would be irresponsible. 48 hours of uncovered raw beef in a home refrigerator is safe. The conditions that make it safe are specific, and they are not complicated. Temperature must stay at or below 40 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the entire brine period. A standard home refrigerator set correctly handles this without any intervention on your part. The wire rack matters more than most people expect. Its job is not just to allow airflow. It keeps the meat elevated so that any moisture released during the brine drains away from the surface rather than collecting underneath it. Pooled liquid against raw meat is a spoilage condition. The rack eliminates it. Fresh chuck roast is food safe in the refrigerator for 3 to 5 days under proper cold storage. A 48-hour brine sits well inside that window with room to spare. Now the hard boundary, because someone will ask, why not simply go longer? The answer is that a standard home refrigerator cannot safely dry age beef beyond this window. True long-term dry aging requires dedicated temperature control, specific humidity levels, and continuous airflow that a kitchen refrigerator does not provide. Without those conditions, extending the uncovered brine past 48 hours risks surface spoilage and rancid fat, not a mildly imperfect steak, but genuinely unsafe meat. This technique is safe because it is short. That is not a limitation to work around. It is the design. Kosher salt, not table salt. The coarser grain is the reason. Table salt dissolves on contact with the meat's surface moisture and immediately forms a wet paste that pools rather than distributes. Kosher salt sits on the surface, draws moisture out gradually, and dissolves at a rate the osmotic process can use. Apply it heavily. More than feels comfortable if you have only ever seasoned a steak at the pan. This is not a last-minute seasoning. It is a 2-day process, and the concentration needs to be high enough to fully penetrate a thick piece of muscle. Cover every surface, top, bottom, all 4 sides, and the fat cap if one is present. No pepper yet. Ground pepper burns at sear temperatures, and the sear comes much later. Season with pepper then. Set a wire rack inside a rimmed sheet pan or tray and place the roast on it. The rack keeps air circulating underneath the meat, which is what the surface drying mechanism requires. Place it in the refrigerator uncovered and leave it there. Do not wrap it. Do not tent it. Covering it traps humidity directly against the surface, defeating the whole purpose. Position it on a middle shelf with clearance on all sides, away from the back wall where condensation tends to form. After 48 hours, the surface will look darker, dull, and slightly tacky rather than wet and shiny. That appearance is correct. Pat it thoroughly dry with paper towels before it goes anywhere near heat. 2 routes, and both are honest answers to what this script is trying to do. The first requires no equipment beyond an oven and a covered roasting vessel. Preheat to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. The low temperature is not a suggestion. It is the mechanism. Above roughly 300 degrees, the exterior of the roast climbs well ahead of the interior. And what collagen conversion needs is sustained time at temperature throughout the entire piece, not surface heat driving inward. Place the roast in the vessel and cover it tightly. The cover traps moisture in the cooking environment and prevents the surface from drying out before the collagen has had time to convert. Target internal temperature depends on the texture you are working toward. Between 195 and 210 degrees produces a fully yielding result that pulls apart cleanly. Pulled earlier, around 175 to 185, the roast holds its shape and slices cleanly. Either way, plan for several hours at that temperature and do not rush it. The second route is sous vide, and it is the more precise tool for the specific goal of this script. A water bath held at 133 degrees Fahrenheit for 24 to 40 hours keeps the interior at medium rare temperature long enough for the collagen to convert fully without driving the meat past that doneness. The result does not look braised. It does not taste braised. It holds a pink interior throughout, and that interior shows the same color a properly cooked steak shows. This is the technique that makes calling it a steak honest rather than aspirational. After either method, rest the meat before it goes near the pan. The sear is the final step, and it is where everything the brine built gets paid off. Cast iron, preheated until water dropped on the surface beads and skates rather than spreading. High smoke point oil, avocado, grapeseed, plain vegetable. Before the meat goes anywhere near the pan, pat every surface completely dry. Paper towels, all sides, and do it thoroughly. The long cook released moisture into the surface, and moisture is still the enemy at this final stage. The Maillard reaction begins at roughly 280 to 330 degrees Fahrenheit. Surface moisture holds the surface at 212 degrees until it has fully evaporated, which means a wet surface cannot brown. It steams instead. The 48-hour brine built a surface that wants to brown the moment it hits dry heat. Do not undermine it with a wet hand or a half-dry pat at the pan. Say plainly what this channel has stated before. Searing does not seal in juices. That claim was disproven long ago, and this channel does not repeat it. The sear builds crust and flavor. That is the whole job, and it is enough. 2 to 3 minutes per side over high heat. Do not move the meat. The crust releases when it has formed, and not before. If you force it early, you tear off the surface you spent 48 hours building. If the roast came out of a sous vide bag, the surface will be wet from the bag. Pat it aggressively dry, and consider resting it uncovered in the refrigerator for 20 minutes before the sear to let the surface firm further. Finish with butter, garlic, and fresh herbs basted over the surface in the final 90 seconds. Then rest. Slice against the grain. What comes off that board is a chuck roast that has no business tasting the way it does. The reason chuck roast spent so long in the braise pot and nowhere else is the same reason most budget cuts stay there. Nobody told the home cook what the cut actually needed. It needed time. Not in a pan, not at high heat, but in a refrigerator with salt and then in a low oven or a water bath long enough for its own chemistry to do the work. The premium on dry-aged beef is real. The funk, the concentration, the nutty depth of a 60-day cut. That takes weeks, and the price reflects it. But the part of that process that gives you the crust, the seasoning, the surface you taste first, that starts with salt and a wire rack. The rest is patience. Subscribe for more.